Have you ever wondered why it is that we find forgiveness so hard? Do you know, we live in a world where I'm kind of daily reminded of that reality. It seems that most days, you can turn on the TV or the news on the internet to find, some celebrity or politician who's done something stupid, and the pile-on is happening, because of what they did. That social media is alive, and that's it. It's career over for them, because boy, there's no way back from whatever it is they've done. Or maybe you've experienced this personally, maybe in terms of receiving or giving forgiveness. Maybe you've hurt a friend in the past and your friend refused to forgive. Or maybe someone's done something to you, maybe a work colleague has said something that upset you and you find it very hard in yourself to let go. Or maybe even something worse has happened in your past. Maybe you've been a victim of some crime or so forth, and you're still carrying the wounds of that to this day. Why is it we find it's so hard to forgive? Well, I think one reason, of course, we live in a post-Christian age. We live in a very secular society, and forgiveness is a profoundly Christian virtue. It always has been, and we've covered that in a previous short answer. And as I think we become an increasingly secular society, the danger is that we actually forget that old virtue of forgiveness. And it's not just me saying that. As a Christian, you can find plenty of atheist politicians and journalists and commentators making that observation. And interestingly, in fact, one of the most famous atheists of all, the 19th century atheist Friedrich Nietzsche, arguably the most influential atheist of the last 200 years, once remarked that he could, looking forward, imagine a society where the idea of God has been abandoned, but he said where that society is still held on to certain Christian doctrines. He said the doctrine of forgiveness, he said, I imagine will be let go. But he said the doctrine of judgment and wrath and damnation, those ideas I can imagine people holding on to, because there is something profoundly satisfying of really putting the boot in when somebody's wronged you. Well, I think he was possibly right in that prediction, but what's driving it? Why have we become an increasingly judgmental society, and one where it's harder, I think, to forgive, either to receive it or to find it? Well, one thing I think that's certainly involved in all of this is social media, because social media in itself, is neutral, right? But what it allows us to do is social media allows us to become increasingly more tribal. Social media allows us to clump together with people who are just like us and hurl all kinds of abuse, or just retweet other people hurling abuse at those people we disagree with. And again, there've been multiple studies showing that particularly politically we are increasingly divided. People have divided into political tribes and don't listen to the side. We just listen to people like us, we just repeat stuff like us, and we consider everybody else as being on the pale. So social media has made this worse. So how do we overcome this? How do we perhaps undoing some of this damage and rediscovering forgiveness as a virtue? Well, a couple of thoughts from a Christian perspective. The first perspective is that really, I think, to perhaps be more open to forgiving others, it can be helpful to realise that actually this whole us and them game doesn't work. And one of the profoundly levelling ideas in the gospel is actually the fact that the Bible reminds us, the gospel reminds us, Jesus reminds us that we are all people whose lives are messed up and screwed up. Politicians like to talk about levelling up. I'd say the Bible talks about levelling down, that we are all have this problem and this mess in our lives. All of us actually are people who have things that we need to say sorry for. And it's very easy to point the finger at others without realising what's going on in your own heart. And one of the things I find has helped me is to remember, actually, I am perhaps not as nice a person as I might naturally think I am. When you realise that you are somebody who needs God's forgiveness as much as the person next to you, then it's perhaps easier to treat others with a bit of respect and dignity and compassion when they screw up. But there's another thing going on, isn't there? I think one of the things we struggle with too is I think we butt up against this idea that forgiveness is costly. And that surprises us, it offends us, we find it hard. Forgiveness is costly, isn't it? If somebody, perhaps a former friend, spreads rumours about you behind your back, sticks the knife in, ruins your reputation, and comes to you and asks for forgiveness, says sorry for what they've done. Well, if you're going to forgive them, it's going to cost you, isn't it? It's cost you some reputation. It's going to cost you resisting the urge to punch their lights out every time they walk past you in the cafeteria. It's costly to forgive them. Or economically, it can be costly. If you lend your iPad to a friend and they accidentally break the thing and they can't afford to replace it, and you say, you know what, you're my friend, don't worry, I'll deal with it. Yeah, they've received forgiveness, it's free for them, but you're the one who's having to pay, in this case, the price of a new iPad. See, forgiveness is always free for the recipient, it's always costly for the one who gives it. And that's maybe sometimes where we struggle. But here's a thought. Do you know the fact that forgiveness is costly shouldn't surprise us, because it applies to the ultimate forgiver himself. It applies to God. Because then God reaches out to us in the person of Jesus and says, right, come on, let's have a conversation. Your life is not as smelling of roses as you thought it was. There are some things we need to address. But look, as well as identifying what's gone wrong, I'm also offering you forgiveness in the person of Jesus. Well, that's costly, because that forgiveness that God offers cost the life of Jesus Christ. And one of the most profound, at least for me, verses in the Bible, in Romans 5 verse 8, we read these words: God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Forgiveness was costly for God. It's free for us. And when you take that on board and you come to really appreciate what that means, I found it becomes that much easier to forgive others, because I know just how much forgiveness I have myself received.